Ace is in. I believe I forgot to send him a link, and that's the reason he was late. Not late, just an idiot's in charge of the gig, that's all. So we're going to try something a bit different to what we'd have at a regular Fire and Dust gig. Coventry poet Aysar Ghassan, who represented us in the 2019 exchange, is going to do a brief interview with Paul Casey. So let's see if we can peek behind the curtain and find out what it's been like organising this poetry exchange for the last 14 years and counting. Take it away, Aysar and Paul. Cheers, guys.
Hi, thanks very much, Rafe. Hello, everyone. Hi, good to see everybody. Hope you're keeping well. What's the weather like in Cork at the moment?
Well, it's a bit overcast. It's not very cold. It's kind of mild, you know. I think we're in for a lashing tomorrow by the looks of things, and half of Saturday is going to lash. But most importantly, Sunday's looking dry because it's a very important day for us. You know, we've got the All Ireland hurling final on Sunday.
Oh,
I know
okay.
for a lot of our guests from Coventry, they would have been taken to a beach and handed a hurley and a slitter and asked to figure out what to do with them.
What do you do with them, Paul?
Well, with a hurley, I wasn't here the year you came, Aysar, so I have to give out to Stan for not introducing you to the almighty hurley, because it's really the national symbol next to the harp of Ireland. You know, it's a game. It's a game where two teams play each other, holding hurleys, which are like long, similar to hockey stick shaped implements, and they hold a leather ball called a slitter. And they have to belt that across the fields to try and get into a goal or to get over the goal for a point. And so there's always a goal somewhere.
Some kind of sticks to kind of get something over, or some kind of something like that, isn't there?
That's it.
There's a ball, and then there's a goal, and there's somebody kicking or throwing or lobbing something into a goal.
That's it.
Oh, and who's playing this time around?
Well, Cork are in the final. For the first time in 8 years. 8 years? I think 8 years. Yeah. So we're all very excited about that.
Cool. Well, good luck.
Yeah, we're playing Limerick, who at the moment, according to all sources, have the strongest team in the country. But I'm not so sure about that anymore. I think we're really on the up, you know. So it's going to be a close one.
Okay. Oh, cool. Well, good luck, Cork. I was going to ask you, Paul, how did you get into writing, and how long have you been into writing? Was it something that your parents did and got you into, or family, or other family, or was it at school, or how did you do it?
I would say writing itself. I mean, I got into reading poetry young, thanks to my mum, I think, and to her sister, who both encouraged me, my Aunt Mary, to read poetry from a fairly young age. I wrote. When I was at school, I used to draw a lot of cartoons. That's what I used to do. So I did storytelling in that way. And then later, when I was in my 20s, I was writing screenplays. I was involved in the film industry, editing and writing scripts, but I didn't start writing poems really until my first poems were in my early 20s, but they were absolutely terrible, and I wouldn't have shared them with anyone, without fearing that I'd be absolutely mortified. But the first time kind of poems came out of me, and they literally gushed out of me at quite a frightening rate. Poems which I felt were significant and which carried a lot of value for me, was in the early 2000s, about just over 20 years ago. Yeah, 20 years ago, around then. So that's really when I got into poetry, and for the first few years I wrote furiously, and hundreds of poems, and that eventually slowed down. But yeah, that's basically how I got into writing.
And in terms of different types of writing, in terms of the difference between writing and editing, I guess a screenplay and writing a poem, what would you say? How do you approach both? Do you approach them with a kind of a similar mindset, or are they totally different pieces of writing, so different creative endeavors for you?
Yeah, I haven't written a script in a long time now, I must say. If anything, I would now be more inclined to adapt writing to script form, like maybe adapt a poem, because I've been involved in poetry films now for a number of years. promoting them primarily, but I've made a couple myself in the middle of doing one at the moment. Script writing, it's very technical. It's more technical than novel writing or short story writing, because you have to consider what's filmable when you're writing a script. What's possible technically. You have to really have things like budget involved as well. The first scripts I wrote were impossible to make because you would need tens of millions to make them. I wrote a trilogy, for example, based on the Lolaborga Bala Éireann, which is the Book of Invasions of Ireland, which is an 11th century text from the Book of Leinster, which describes all the mythological, the great epic stories of Ireland, prior to our history. History in Ireland started very late because we rejected writing for so very, very long. So most of our history was transmitted orally for centuries and centuries. So that that would have been sort of on the scale of Tolkien, essentially. So there was no one going to fund me to make any films like that. So I guess I moved away from film script writing for two reasons. One, because I didn't want to have to be confined in that way, I suppose. But more importantly, I found that commercial film script writing ended up being in the hands of a producer who wanted to change everything for the sake of the bottom line for a producer, which is always money at the end of the day. So I moved away from filmmaking for quite a long time until I discovered poetry films. But poetry, I didn't consciously get into it. It just happened. It literally just happened. My first major poem came out of me after watching a rerun of The Big Blue by myself. I was in my apartment. I was running in a multimedia company at the time, watching The Big Blue, and just engrossed in this one scene where these, it's about these divers who free dive in the Mediterranean, or used to. It's illegal to do it now, to see who could dive the deepest without an oxygen tank. And so in one of those scenes, I was unconsciously holding my breath throughout the entire scene, just dying for this diver to make his way back up to the surface and not drown. And when that happened, I had to press stop. I exhaled and I gushed forth with this epic poem, essentially a 10-minute long to recite poem at speed, called It's Not All Bad. And that survived, as I wrote. It took me half an hour to write it, and that survived fully intact, except for about 10 words, which changed. And actually, believe it or not, Jonathan Morley published that poem in 2009 as part of a chapbook. So my first publication in print was thanks to the Coventry Press in Coventry, with that poem being the title poem of the chapbook.
It's like a kind of a stream of consciousness, really, that just came out of it.
Yeah, very much so.
That's amazing. Well, I was going to ask as well. Going to Cork was a pleasure, a privilege when myself and Rafe went to Cork 2 years ago now. It's sort of flown by. Obviously, the Irish writing is really different to the English writing. How do you think that's? What are the kind of characteristics do you think of both, if there are? I mean, they're really eclectic fields, aren't they? But what do you think the kind of main aspects that differentiate the two countries in terms of writing are? Like, a big question, I know, but just a kind of just your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. That is a tough one to nail down. Thomas McCarthy is a Cork poet who's spoken about that before, and he kind of distinguishes I suppose, the nature of English poets, rather than their poetry, and the nature of Irish poets. and that Irish poets, tend to be a little more worried about what other people are going to think about what they write. Whereas, English poets tend to not give a damn about what other people think they write, even though I'm not sure that dichotomy is strictly true, but perhaps, it does define some difference over the years of its tradition, certainly over the last 100 years, I would say, possibly. But of course, there's a great meeting place for English and Irish poetry. There's a great tradition of Anglo-Irish poetry in Ireland, of course. So, often I find that I can't distinguish between, whether a poet is Irish or English when they've written a poem. I'd find it easier to tell if they were American, to be honest, than to tell whether they were English or Irish. I find the sentiment often, the underlying, should we say, complex of prevalent sentiments that English and Irish poets carry with them. The overlap is huge, so often it's impossible to tell the difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you can always tell an American writer always the kind of ambition they're writing. I guess that's huge, isn't it? I guess it's quite interesting. Just a little bit about Ó Bhéal. How did it get started, and how long have you been involved with Ó Bhéal?
Ó Bhéal, I began in 2007 here in Cork. Number of reasons, because it was a kind of an excuse or an opportunity for me to use all of my different skill sets, I guess, at the time. I came from a big multimedia and film background as well, from a working point of view, and editing, a lot of editing. But I had been involved in poetry events in South Africa and in Dublin before that, which ran very successfully, and also speak a number of languages. So it all just kind of, that, along with the idea that poetry in Cork, I felt at the time was quite restricted for, shall we say, the general populace. I found it very exclusive. I think there's a great history of that in England as well. Certainly around Ireland, where it's more of a club of you're either you get it or you don't, or and there's a certain amount of snobbishness that came with it, a certain amount of political privilege that came with it that really upset me, I think, my sensibility. So I wanted to create an environment which was inclusive, I think, more than anything.
Okay, that's yeah, that's really cool, because I think it's the same with Fire and Dust here in Coventry. It's a really inclusive environment, and I certainly have been a participant in Fire and Dust for 4 or 5 years now, and without Fire and Dust, I would have probably never got started at all. So I owe a lot to a kind of inclusive environment that allows people to get up there and do something without judging them. I was just going to ask you as well about the exchange. How did the conversations about which led to the exchange? How did they get going?
Okay, I think initially in 2008, Ó Bhéal was only a year on the go, and my biggest struggle at the time was funding. Was just trying to get funding from anywhere and from any place to try and pay for an extra event, because it was a very ambitious project from the beginning, to put on 50 events per year, which we did up until January 2020, actually, until we had no choice but to go, or until I should say, had no choice but to go monthly. So it's being able to support it meant trying to get as many different streams of income as possible, and one of those that appeared on the potential horizon for us was Twin City funding from the City Council, a separate stream which wouldn't affect any of our other funding. So I have to say that the first reason I looked at Coventry was because of its proximity, literally because I knew that if we managed to get something going, we could get across to each other without too much expense, And I think that was the primary thing. So then I thought, okay, let me just phone around Coventry. I also tried a couple of our other twins in mainland Europe, but I didn't have much success discovering any poetry communities there. And I think, was it, what is the name of the librarian in Coventry at the time? Was it Dick? And Tony, you'll probably know this. Wasn't Dick White? What was his name now again? I
Colin, hang on a minute. Peter,
Colin,
that wasn't Peter
Colin.
Walters, was it?
No, it was Colin.
Oh, Colin Scott.
Colin Scott. That's who it
Yeah.
was.
He's a legend. He's wicked, yeah.
Yeah. So I know I eventually got hold of, firstly, I managed to get hold of Colin, and he put me on to John Morley. He said, get hold of John Morley about this. And then when I tried to get hold of John, I think that email might have even gone to Jane Cummane. And I think there was a bit of back and forth between myself and Jane as well, because Jane and John were working together at the time. And John was very amenable to us trying something out. So I put forth a bit of, an application to the council. And they said, yeah, they would pay for a couple of us to go over to Coventry. So myself and Billy went over, and then Jennifer Matthews came over as well. And yeah, we haven't looked back since. It was absolutely brilliant experience. The first year we came over, we were part of the Godiva Festival, and we were on stage with LKJ, and a bunch of other luminaries as well. Kai Miller was there, and we had an absolutely brilliant time of it. Yeah, so we haven't looked back.
And one final question for you, Paul. You've been very, very generous asking these kind of questions from me today, taking part in this. Just want to ask you really about what your thoughts are the future of poetry. In terms of, you've seen a lot of poets come and go, and a lot of different styles over the last 20 years, I should imagine. What kind of things do you think are happening now? What kind of things excite you? And where do you think they might go in the future?
That's a great question. And yeah, it reminds me of when I began Ó Bhéal as well, thinking then that there weren't that many opportunities for poets, and it's such a short time ago. And in that short time, I think poetry has mushroomed into a golden age that it hasn't seen since before our history books have recorded, I think, well, certainly on these islands anyway. Now poetry is absolutely flourishing. It's a fantastic state of being at the moment, and of dynamic movement and shift and evolution within itself. So I've got no worries about poetry and poets and younger generations, and it's being shared and taught and facilitated in schools now in ways that it wasn't before. So we're getting generational depth to the development of poetry in its understanding as well as in its creation. So I've got no worries about any precarious sort of aspect to its future. But where I do see it going is engaging more with technology and being more creative in that sense. We're certainly gearing up towards running hybrid events over on this side. As soon as we can get the go-ahead to start running in-person events again, we're going to try to retain. I think there'll be a pressure on a lot of different organizations, cultural organizations around the world to do the same, to retain that digital aspect and integrate it into a live setting where you have your in-person dimension as well as your international potential. It's we've evolved in so many ways thanks to this. It's the silver lining of the great tragedy that has recently befallen us. I think, and that can only really work to our advantage if we're careful about it. So I think, yeah, it'll be hybrid and it'll be exciting.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and I hope that we get to meet in person in the not too distant future.
Likewise, thank you, Aysar.
I'll hand everything over, proceedings over, back to Rafe. Thanks.
Cheers, Az. That was great. Let's give him a hand, because there were some tricky questions there, with some really interesting questions and answers. Yeah, you did a great job. I enjoyed that. Just going to say, let's take a very short comfort break, like just 5 minutes, just to stretch legs and grab a drink, go toilet. Then we'll come back. We'll have the rest of the anthology poets and then the open mic. So just go away for 5 minutes, or stay and chat, whichever you'd rather do.